The transport helicopter couldn't land properly. That should have been my first warning. Station 12 sat on the ice shelf like someone had dropped a massive triangle from space and forgotten about it. The pilot kept circling, muttering into his headset about crosswinds that didn't exist. I pressed my face against the window, watching the facility grow larger with each pass. 3 perfect sides, each maybe 200 feet long. No visible windows on the outer walls, just smooth metal surfaces that caught the Arctic sun wrong, throwing back colors that hurt to look at. The whole structure angled inward as it rose, coming to a sharp point maybe 60 feet up. Who builds like that out here? Every other research station I'd worked, McMurdo, Alert, even that cramped outpost in Svalbard, they built low and wide. You hunker down against the wind, not reach up to meet it. The pilot finally set us down on a landing pad that jutted out from the western corner. My stomach dropped as the skids touched ice. 20 years of field work, and landings still made me want to puke. "End of the line," the pilot said. He wouldn't look at me. I grabbed my duffel and climbed out. The cold hit like a physical thing, shoving its way through my parka's seams. -43 according to my watch. The kind of cold that made your nose hairs freeze on the first breath. A woman waited by the entrance hatch, bundled in standard issue thermal gear. She waved me over, and I jogged the 30 yards, my boots squeaking on the packed snow. Behind me, the helicopter lifted off immediately. No cool down, no refuel, just gone. "Noah Davidson?" the woman had to shout over the rotor wash. I nodded. "Welcome to Station 12. I'm Jordan Alvarado, medical." She turned before I could respond, swiping a keycard against a reader I hadn't noticed. The hatch, and it was a hatch, not a door, submarine style with a wheel lock, swung inward on silent hinges. The entry chamber felt wrong the second I stepped inside. Too warm, for one thing. Had to be pushing 70 degrees, but more than that, the proportions were off. The ceiling angled away at maybe 30 degrees, following the building's outer slope. Made you want to duck even though there was plenty of headroom. Jordan sealed the hatch behind us. The wheel lock spun easily. No resistance. Too easily. Everything here looked new, pristine, but Station 12 had supposedly been operational for 3 years. "Leave your outer gear here," Jordan said, already stripping off her parka. "Director Lewis wants to see you immediately." I hung my coat on a hook that looked hand-forged, not standard supply. Thought I'd have time to settle in first. Nobody settles in at 12. Jordan's smile didn't reach her eyes. You adapt or you don't. This way. The corridors continued that weird angle thing. Every surface sloped inward, making the walkways narrower at shoulder height than at the floor. The walls were bare metal, aluminum maybe, or some alloy I didn't recognize. No paint, no signs, no markings except small symbols etched at each intersection. Triangles within triangles getting smaller toward the center. We passed other personnel, all in identical gray coveralls. Nobody made eye contact. One guy, tall, Asian features, maybe 30, actually turned to face the wall as we approached, like we were contaminated. "Friendly place," I muttered. Jordan's pace didn't slow. "You'll understand soon enough." The director's office occupied a corner space where 2 of the building's sides met. The angle where they joined created a sharp vertical line that drew your eye upward. Kelsey Lewis sat behind a desk that followed the room's geometry, triangular with her positioned at the narrow end. "Dr. Davidson." She stood, extending a hand. Her grip was firm, brief. "I'm Director Lewis. I trust your journey wasn't too difficult." Pilot seemed nervous. They always are. She gestured to a chair that forced me to sit at an odd angle to face her. "I'll be direct. Station 12 operates under protocols that differ significantly from other Arctic facilities. You've been brought here for your expertise in ice shelf dynamics and thermal analysis. However, your work will extend beyond those parameters." I waited. In my experience, administrators who talked about extending parameters usually wanted you to do someone else's job for free. Lewis opened a folder. Paper files, not digital. "You'll be assigned to exterior monitoring. Alpha Shift, Sector 7. Your supervisor will brief you on specifics, but I need to establish ground rules." She looked up, making direct eye contact for the first time. "First, all observations are recorded in writing. No digital devices during monitoring shifts. Second, you do not venture beyond the thermal fence without explicit authorization from me personally. Third, any anomalies are reported immediately through proper channels." What kind of anomalies? You'll know them when you see them. She closed the folder. Questions? I had about 50, starting with why a research station needed a thermal fence and ending with what the hell we were researching. But something in her expression warned me off. When do I start? Tomorrow, 0600. Jordan will show you to your quarters. One more thing. She paused, seeming to weigh her words. Station 12 requires adaptation. Some personnel adjust quickly, others don't. Give yourself time. Jordan led me through more slanted corridors to a residential section. My room was a triangle, because of course it was. Bed in one corner, desk in another, tiny bathroom behind a partition. A single window, the first I'd seen, looked out onto endless white. Dinner's at 1800, Jordan said. Mandatory attendance. Your supervisor will find you there. She hesitated at the door. Word of advice? Don't ask too many questions your first week. Just watch and learn. After she left, I unpacked slowly. 3 months of contracts, they'd said, studying ice shelf stability in a region experiencing unusual thermal variations. Good pay, interesting work, chance to contribute to climate science. Nobody had mentioned the triangular architecture or staff that acted like cult members. I tested the bed, firm, standard issue. The desk held basic supplies, notebooks, pens, a manual titled Station 12 Monitoring Protocols that was mostly redacted black lines. The bathroom had a shower that would fit one person if they didn't mind banging elbows on the slanted walls. Home sweet home. That first dinner stays with me. 29 people in a triangular mess hall, eating in near silence. The food was decent, better than most stations, but conversation died every time someone new tried to start it. I counted 14 attempts before giving up. My supervisor found me over coffee. Marcus Webb, originally from Calgary, 6 years Arctic experience. He had the 1,000-yard stare I associated with personnel who'd wintered over one too many times. Davidson, you're with me tomorrow, Sector 7. Jordan mentioned that. What exactly are we monitoring? He glanced around, lowered his voice. Ice integrity, thermal readings, standard stuff. His tone suggested it was anything but standard. Oh, 5:45, equipment room. Don't be late. I spent the evening studying what little of the protocol manual wasn't blacked out. Mostly standard safety procedures, but with odd additions. Personnel will maintain visual confirmation of sector boundaries at all times. What did that mean? Under no circumstances should monitoring staff approach or interact with indigenous formations. Indigenous formations? Sleep came hard that first night. The building made sounds, not settling noises like wood or regular metal, but almost musical tones, like someone running a bow across a massive violin string somewhere in the walls. I lay there counting the intervals between notes, trying to find a pattern. There wasn't one. My alarm buzzed at 5:15. I dressed in the thermal layers I'd brought, added the gray coveralls everyone seemed to wear, and made my way to the equipment room. Marcus was already there with 2 other monitors. Chen and Roth, they mumbled when introduced. Sector 7's about a mile out, Marcus explained, handing me a pack loaded with gear. We walk the perimeter, take readings every 200 meters, log everything by hand. Questions? Why no digital equipment? The other 3 exchanged looks. Interference, Chen said finally. Electronics get unreliable near the barriers. We suited up and headed out through a different exit than I'd entered. This one faced northeast, opening onto a landscape of pressure ridges and wind-carved sastrugi. The sun wouldn't rise for another month, but the aurora provided enough light to navigate by. Green curtains danced overhead, unusually active. The thermal fence appeared as a faint shimmer in the air, like heat distortion, except it was 50 below. Posts every 100 feet generated the barrier, though I couldn't see any obvious connection between them. We passed through at a checkpoint. My skin prickled, static discharge maybe, and continued toward the monitoring zone. Stay together, Marcus said. No wandering. The ice out here looked different, smoother, despite the constant wind, like someone had polished it. Our boots made strange sounds on the surface, almost hollow. Chen kept checking behind us, nervous energy I couldn't place. Sector 7 turned out to be a natural amphitheater in the ice, maybe 300 feet across. The walls rose 20 feet on 3 sides, and I swear they formed a rough triangle. Marcus led us to the north point and started unpacking instruments. Standard thermal probe, he said, showing me a device that looked anything but standard. The metal gleamed with that same wrong-colored reflection as the station walls. Insert to depth of 1 meter. Wait for reading. Log results. I took the probe, knelt at the designated spot. The ice felt warm through my gloves. Impossible at this temperature. The probe slid in too easily, like pushing through slush instead of solid pack ice. The reading made no sense, +4 Celsius at depth. That can't be right. Log it, Marcus said. Don't interpret, just record. We worked our way around the perimeter. Every reading showed temperatures that shouldn't exist. The ice here was literally warm, yet solid. My brain kept trying to reconcile the impossibility. That's when I saw the markings. The eastern wall of the amphitheater bore patterns etched into the ice. Not carved, etched, like someone had used acid. Triangular forms nested inside each other, connected by lines that hurt to follow with your eyes. The patterns seemed to shift in my peripheral vision, rearranging when I wasn't looking directly at them. What the hell is that? Chen grabbed my arm, pulled me back. Don't what? I'm just looking. Log the readings, Marcus said. His voice carried an edge I hadn't heard before. Nothing else. But I couldn't stop staring. The patterns had depth that shouldn't be possible on a flat surface, like looking into one of those magic eye pictures, except this pulled your vision in instead of letting it relax. The lines seemed to extend back into the ice, forming corridors or... Davidson! Marcus yanked me around to face him. I said log the readings. Nothing else. The walk back to the station passed in tense silence. I kept turning to look at the amphitheater walls, catching glimpses of patterns that definitely moved when I wasn't watching. Chen and Roth pointedly avoided looking at all, keeping their eyes fixed on the ground ahead. At dinner, I tried bringing it up. Those markings in Sector 7. Every conversation at nearby tables stopped. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Chen actually stood up and left. We don't discuss field observations in common areas, Marcus said quietly. Protocol. But I caught the looks. Fear, mostly. And something else. Resignation. Like they'd all seen the patterns, all wondered about them, and learned it was better not to ask. Wade Wong found me after dinner. He was the guy who'd turned away in the corridor that first day. Turns out he was a climatologist from Vancouver. Been at 12 for 8 months. First time seeing the etchings? He asked. I nodded. Yeah, they get everyone. He glanced around, but the mess had mostly emptied. Word of advice? Don't stare too long, and definitely don't touch them. What happens if you touch them? Wade's hands trembled slightly as he gathered his tray. Martinez touched them 3 weeks ago. He's in the medical wing now. Won't stop drawing triangles. He left before I could ask more. The first week crawled by like that. Morning monitoring shifts that revealed more impossible readings. Ice that stayed warm. Patterns that shifted and crawled when you weren't looking. Staff that refused to discuss any of it beyond clinical recordings in our logbooks. I filled 3 notebooks with observations. Temperature inversions that defied physics. Ice formations that appeared overnight in configurations that wind couldn't create. And always those etched patterns growing more complex each time I saw them. Director Lewis called me in on day 6. Your reports are thorough, she said, paging through my submissions. Perhaps too thorough. I'm recording what I see. Yes, that's the problem. She set the papers aside. Station 12 studies phenomena that don't fit conventional understanding. Our role is to document, not interpret. The moment we try to force explanations, we lose objectivity. With respect, Director, those patterns aren't natural. The temperature readings are consistent with localized geothermal activity. I laughed, actually laughed. Geothermal? We're on an ice shelf. The nearest volcanic activity is... Dr. Davidson. Her voice cut like ice. You have 2 choices. Accept that Station 12 operates under different parameters than you're accustomed to, or request early transport home, which would, of course, violate your contract. The threat was clear. Play along or face legal consequences. I'd signed enough NDAs to paper a small room. I understand. Do you? She leaned back, studying me. This station has been operational for 3 years. In that time, we've had 4 personnel request emergency evacuation. 2 who simply walked out onto the ice and didn't return. 1 who... She stopped. The point is, adaptation requires accepting that some questions don't have answers. At least, not answers we're equipped to process. I thought about Martinez, drawing triangles in the medical wing. And if we can't adapt? Then Station 12 breaks you. She said it matter-of-factly, like commenting on weather. The choice is yours. The next morning brought my first real test. Sector 7's amphitheater had changed overnight. The etched patterns now covered all 3 walls, interconnected in ways that made my eyes water. But worse, much worse, was what sat in the center. A perfect sphere of ice, maybe 6 feet in diameter, hovering 3 feet off the ground. No support, no wires, just floating there, rotating slowly. Marcus acted like it wasn't there. Chen and Roth took their readings around it, careful not to get too close. I stood frozen, watching light refract through its surface in patterns that matched the wall etchings. "Davidson," Marcus called. "Southeast quadrant needs logging." I forced myself to move, to take readings, to pretend a massive ice sphere wasn't defying gravity 20 feet away. My hands shook so badly I could barely write. The temperature near it read +12. +12, in the middle of the Arctic winter. We finished our rounds in record time. Nobody spoke on the walk back, but I saw Roth crying behind his goggles, tears freezing on his cheeks. That night, I couldn't eat, couldn't focus. The sphere dominated my thoughts, its perfect surface, its impossible suspension, the way it had hummed at a frequency just below hearing. Wade sat across from me, picking at his own untouched meal. "You saw it," he said. Not a question. I nodded. "They appear sometimes, different sectors, different sizes. R&D thinks there's some kind of expression, the ice trying to communicate. Ice doesn't communicate." Wade's laugh had no humor in it. "Ice doesn't hover either, doesn't stay warm at 50 below, doesn't etch patterns that move." He pushed his tray away. "You know what's really fucked? The supply plane's 2 weeks overdue. Communications have been experiencing interference for a month, and Lewis keeps saying everything's normal." I'd noticed the communication issues. Satellite phones that wouldn't connect, internet that dropped every few minutes, radio static that sometimes sounded like whispers. "You think we're cut off?" "I think..." Wade stopped, eyes fixed on something behind me. Director Lewis stood in the mess hall entrance, scanning the room. Her gaze settled on our table. She didn't approach, didn't speak, just watched for a long moment, then left. "I think we should be very careful," Wade finished. The monitoring shifts continued. Day after day, walking the perimeter, taking impossible readings, pretending not to see phenomena that shouldn't exist. The sphere in Sector 7 grew larger. Others appeared in different sectors. Chen mentioned one in Sector 3 that sang, though he wouldn't elaborate. I started having dreams about the patterns. Geometric fever dreams where I moved through corridors of ice that rearranged themselves with each step. Sometimes I'd wake to find I'd been drawing triangles on my notepad in my sleep. Simple ones at first, then increasingly complex configurations that hurt to look at in daylight. 2 weeks in, during a particularly severe storm that grounded all operations, Wade didn't show for dinner. I found him in his room, standing at the window, drawing patterns on the glass with his finger. "Wade?" He didn't turn. "Do you hear them too? The frequencies? They're in the walls now. Have been all along probably, but now I can hear them." I listened, just wind in the building's strange harmonic groans. "It's like music," he continued. "If music could think, if it could want things." His finger never stopped moving, creating intricate designs in the condensation. Martinez was right to touch them. We're all going to touch them eventually. I reported it to medical. Jordan sedated him, said he'd be fine after some rest. But I saw the look she shared with the orderlies. Wade was the 4th this month, apparently. That night, unable to sleep, I walked the station's corridors. The triangular passages seemed to stretch longer than they should, angles becoming more acute. Or maybe that was exhaustion playing tricks. Hard to tell anymore. I found myself in a section I didn't recognize. The ceiling here dropped lower, forcing me to hunch. The metal walls bore those same etched patterns, but old, oxidized like they'd been there since construction. How had I missed this area before? A door stood open at the corridor's end. Inside, monitors covered one wall, old CRT screens showing grainy footage. I recognized Sector 7, Sector 3, others I hadn't visited. But the timestamps were wrong, years wrong. On one screen, figures in thermal gear stood around a massive ice formation. The quality was too poor to make out faces, but their body language screamed panic. The formation pulsed with internal light. The figures backed away. Then the feed cut to static. Another screen showed what looked like the station under construction. But instead of normal building equipment, workers arranged massive metal triangles according to patterns drawn in the snow. Patterns that matched the ice etchings perfectly. "You shouldn't be here." I spun around. Director Lewis stood in the doorway, no longer wearing her usual administrative mask. She looked tired, ancient, tired. "How long?" I asked. "How long have you known what this place really is?" She entered the room, moved to the monitors. Station 12 wasn't built to study anomalies, Dr. Davidson. It was built because of them. The patterns appeared first. The formations followed. We're not researchers. We're witnesses. To what? We don't know. She touched one of the screens showing Sector 7. The sphere had grown again. 3 years of observation, and we're no closer to understanding. But we've learned one thing. The phenomena respond to attention. The more we watch, the more active they become. Then why keep watching? Her smile held no warmth. Because when we stopped, when the original team tried to abandon the station, the patterns appeared inside. On the walls, in the ice forming on windows, in condensation, on mirrors. She turned to face me. "We don't study them, Dr. Davidson. They study us." The weight of it crashed down. The careful routines, the refusal to discuss observations, the fear in everyone's eyes. We weren't monitoring the ice. We were feeding it, and it was hungry for more. "Wade's not sick," I said. "He's just, what, further along?" The patterns want to be understood. They push at our minds looking for a way in. Some resist longer than others. She moved past me toward the door. "You should return to your quarters. Morning shift comes early." But I couldn't let it go. What about communications? Supplies? How long before someone realizes no one's coming? She paused in the doorway. The last supply drop was 7 weeks ago. The pilot reported navigation anomalies and refused to return. Satellite uplinks fail because the ionosphere here has changed. We're alone with whatever's happening. She left me standing there among the monitors. On the screens, ice formations pulsed and shifted. Patterns crawled across surfaces like living things. And in Sector 7, the sphere continued its slow rotation, waiting for something none of us understood. I made it back to my quarters as others emerged for the day shift. They moved with practiced precision, following routines that kept them functional, kept them from thinking too hard about what they'd see out on the ice. Marcus found me at breakfast. "Sector 7's yours today. Solo shift. Chen and Roth are indisposed." I wanted to refuse, to demand answers, to grab someone and shake them until they admitted how insane this all was. Instead, I nodded, took my equipment, walked out into the permanent twilight. The sphere had doubled in size overnight. It dominated the amphitheater now, its surface rippling with patterns that mirrored the wall etchings. I stood at the perimeter, thermometer in hand, watching formations that shouldn't exist. That's when I understood. We weren't just witnesses. We were part of the pattern now, our observations woven into whatever was emerging from the ice. Every reading, every notation, every moment of focused attention, it all fed into something vast and patient and utterly alien. Station 12 wasn't a research facility. It was an altar, and we were the offering. I took my readings, logged my observations, followed the routine that kept me tethered to some semblance of normalcy. But I could feel the patterns pulling at the edges of my vision, trying to show me things I wasn't ready to see. Not yet. The walk back stretched longer than it should have. Or maybe I moved slower, reluctant to return to those angled corridors and silent meals. Either way, by the time I reached the thermal fence, the aurora had shifted from green to deep purple. Never seen that before. Inside, personnel moved through their shifts like clockwork. Perfect routines, perfect silence. I understood now why nobody made eye contact. Look too long at another person here, and you might see the patterns reflected in their pupils, might recognize the same fractal geometry eating at your own thoughts. We adapted or we broke, and breaking, I was beginning to suspect, might be the saner option. The observation tower wasn't meant for midnight shifts. That's the first thing you need to understand about what happened. Marcus had stuck me up there after finding me poking around the restricted corridors again. Punishment detail, he called it. 8 hours alone with nothing but the monitoring equipment and a view of the thermal perimeter glowing orange against the ice. I'd been up there maybe 3 hours when I heard it. Started as a vibration more than a sound. You know how a tuning fork feels when you hold it against your skull? Like that, but coming from everywhere at once. The coffee in my thermos rippled in perfect concentric circles. The pencil on my clipboard walked itself toward the edge of the desk. Then the actual sound hit, low and deep, below what you'd think human ears could process. But I heard it, felt it, crawling up through the floor plates and into my bones. The frequency made my teeth ache, made my vision blur at the edges. I tried to ignore it at first, logged the standard readings, checked the thermal fence indicators, everything normal, all systems green. But that sound kept building, kept pulling at something inside my chest like a fishhook. The tower had 360 visibility through reinforced glass. I pressed my face against the north-facing window, breath fogging the surface. Out past the thermal perimeter, the ice stretched flat and endless under the aurora. Nothing moving, nothing that should be making that sound, but it was coming from out there. I knew it the way you know which direction home is, even with your eyes closed. The manual was clear about leaving your post. Contract violation, immediate termination, forfeiture of all pay. Lewis had made that real clear during orientation. Stay inside the fence, always. Funny thing about rules, though, they only work when the world makes sense. I found myself at the tower hatch before I'd decided to move. My hands worked the wheel lock on autopilot while that resonance pressed against my skull from inside and out. The cold hit like a physical blow when I stepped onto the exterior ladder. -40 at least, but I barely felt it. The sound had me, pulled me down those metal rungs like I was on a rope. The thermal fence ran in a perfect circle around the station, orange heating elements glowing between the posts, no gaps in the barrier. That's what they told us. But I'd been walking the perimeter for weeks, knew where the maintenance panel created a 2-foot space between sections 7 and 8. My body moved without consulting my brain. Squeezed through that gap sideways, thermal elements singing my jacket. The proximity alarm should have triggered, should have brought security running. Nothing happened. Just me and the ice and that impossible sound. Past the fence, the temperature dropped another 10 degrees easy. My breath came out in clouds that fell straight down, frozen before they could disperse. The ice under my boots wasn't like the stuff inside the perimeter. This was old ice, ancient ice, the kind that's been compressed for millennia until it turns that deep blue that looks black in the dark. The sound got louder with each step, not louder like volume, louder like meaning. Like it was trying to tell me something in a language my brain couldn't parse, but my bones understood. 20 meters out, 50, 100, then I saw it. The sphere sat half buried in a depression, maybe 3 feet of it showing above the ice line. Perfect crystal, clear as Arctic air, but looking at it hurt. The thing bent light wrong, twisted the space around it into angles that shouldn't exist. The aurora overhead warped where it passed through the sphere's influence, green ribbons folding into themselves. I stopped 10 feet away. Had to. The sound coming off that thing was pure geometry translated into vibration. It pressed against my eardrums, my sinuses, the fluid in my eyes, made me want to throw up and sing at the same time. The ice around the sphere was different, smoother, like it had melted and refrozen 1,000 times. I could see patterns in it. Fractals that repeated down to scales my eyes couldn't follow. And beneath the ice, the hint of something larger. The sphere wasn't sitting on the surface. It was the tip of something massive, like an iceberg in reverse. I should have run. Every instinct encoded in human DNA over 1 million years of evolution screamed at me to get away from that thing. But the sound had me. It promised answers to questions I hadn't known I was asking. Showed me glimpses of the patterns behind the patterns. The mathematics that held reality together at the seams. My hand reached out. I watched it happen like watching someone else's body. The thermal glove looked so small against that perfect crystal surface. Contact. The universe turned inside out. No, that's not right. The universe stayed exactly where it was. I was the one who got pulled through, turned inside out, scattered across dimensions I didn't have names for. The sphere wasn't a sphere at all. It was a door, a lens, a focal point where our reality touched something vast and terrible and impossibly old. I found myself in a place that wasn't a place. No up or down, no distance or direction. Just awareness floating in an endless sea of angles that shouldn't exist. Colors that human eyes weren't built to process. Sounds that were also tastes, that were also memories of things that hadn't happened yet. And in the center of it all, Yog Sothoth. How do you describe something that exists in every dimension at once? Imagine a sphere made of spheres, each one containing infinite smaller spheres, fractaling down forever. Now imagine that's just the shadow it casts in 3 dimensions. The actual thing was more. So much more that looking at it felt like my brain was trying to divide by 0. It spoke without speaking. The words arrived in my head already translated, already understood, like they'd always been there. The watchers watch without knowing. The prison persists through observation. Images flooded through me. Station 12 being built, but in reverse. The future flowing backward into the past. The builders following plans they thought they'd designed, not knowing the patterns had been whispered into their dreams by something that existed outside time. Every measurement, every angle, every placement of metal and concrete designed to create a specific resonance, a cage made of geometry and human consciousness. Your presence maintains the seal. Your observations collapse the possibilities. As long as you watch, I remain. I saw the truth then. The station wasn't studying the phenomena. The station was the phenomenon. Every researcher who'd ever worked there, every observation logged, every pattern traced, we were the bars on the cage. Our consciousness, focused through the station's peculiar architecture, created a kind of psychic weight that held something unimaginably vast in check. But watchers tire, watchers break, and when the last eye closes, the vision shattered. I found myself on my knees in the snow, thermal glove fused to the sphere's surface. Had to tear it off, leaving skin behind. Blood froze instantly on the crystal, forming new patterns that hurt to perceive. The sound was gone. The night was silent except for my ragged breathing and the distant hum of the thermal fence. I understood now why the supply planes stopped coming, why communications failed, why Director Lewis kept us all there even as people broke down, walked off into the ice, lost themselves in the patterns. We weren't researchers, we were guards, and we were guarding our own prison. The thing about cosmic entities, they don't explain themselves the way you'd expect. When Yog Sothoth spoke to me through that sphere, it wasn't words exactly, more like having knowledge poured directly into the cracks of your mind, filling spaces you didn't know were empty. The stars have shifted, it said, though said isn't right. The information just existed suddenly, burning cold behind my eyes. After 10,000 of your years, the celestial locks weaken. I was still on my knees in that depression, hand fused to the crystal, blood freezing in geometric patterns where my skin had torn away. The aurora overhead had gone wrong, purple-black ribbons that hurt to look at, twisting in directions that shouldn't exist. Through the sphere's surface, I could see those infinite nested dimensions, each one containing the same entity looking back at me with a tension that felt like drowning. You understand the prison now. Again, not words. Just sudden terrible comprehension flooding through the contact point. Your species built it according to my whispers, thinking yourselves clever. But every prison requires a key. The knowledge came in waves, how the planetary alignments that had held for millennia were shifting, Jupiter's orbit decaying by fractions of degrees, Saturn's rings spreading thinner, changes too subtle for our instruments but catastrophic for the dimensional mathematics that kept reality stable. The bonds were unraveling thread by thread, and Station 12, our perfect geometric cage, couldn't compensate forever. I choose you, Yog Sothoth continued, and with that choice came agony. Not physical pain, though my nerves screamed as frost spread up my arm. This was deeper, having pieces of myself pulled aside to make room for something else. Fragments of cosmic knowledge forcing their way into spaces between thoughts, nestling into the meat of my brain like shards of glass. I understood things I couldn't possibly understand, saw mathematical proofs written in colors that don't exist, felt the weight of dimensions pressing against our thin bubble of reality. You will carry me, it said. When the moment comes, you will know. The contact broke. I found myself sprawled backward in the snow, thermal gloves still fused to the sphere but no longer attached to my hand. The skin had torn away clean, leaving raw meat that steamed in the Arctic air before freezing solid. Should have hurt more than it did. Should have killed me, probably. But something had changed in those moments of contact. some fundamental alteration to what I was. The sphere pulsed once, a deep throb that made the ice groan for 50 meters in every direction. Then it sank, no melting, no displacement, just drew itself down through solid ice like it was made of air, leaving only a perfectly smooth depression and my ruined glove frozen to nothing. I tried to stand, fell, tried again. My legs worked wrong, like I'd forgotten which muscles did what. The aurora had returned to its normal green, but I could still see the other colors underneath if I didn't focus. Could still feel those nested dimensions pressing close, separated from our world by barriers thin as paper. Don't know how long I knelt there, cradling my frozen hand. Long enough for the exposed meat to go numb. Long enough for frost to build up on my eyelashes. Long enough that when Jordan found me, I'd stopped shivering entirely. Jesus Christ, Noah. Her voice came from somewhere far away, though she was right beside me. What the hell were you thinking? She had 2 others with her, Chen maybe, and somebody in maintenance orange. They wrapped me in thermal blankets, got me on my feet. I kept trying to tell them about the sphere, about Yog-Sothoth, about the cosmic knowledge burning holes in my consciousness. But my mouth wouldn't work right, just made these broken sounds that might have been words in some other language. "Get him to medical," Jordan said. "Core temp's got to be below 90. How long was he out here?" They half carried, half dragged me back through the gap in the thermal fence. Every step felt wrong, like the ground wasn't quite where it should be. Like I was walking on multiple surfaces at once. The ice here, but also ice from other times, other dimensions, all occupying the same space. In medical, everything blurred together. Jordan cutting away my clothes with trauma shears, the sting of IV needles, warming blankets that felt like they were cooking me from the inside. She kept asking questions. What happened? Where was I? Did I know my name? But the answers kept coming out sideways. The sphere was... I tried to explain about the dimensional prison, about the entity choosing me as its conduit, but Jordan just increased the IV drip. "Severe hypothermia," she said to someone behind me. "Core temp at 87.2. He's lucky to be alive." "What about the hand?" Another voice, male, sounded concerned. "Frostbite. Lost the glove somehow. We'll have to wait for the tissue to demarcate before we know how bad." They wrapped my hand in gauze and thermal padding, kept me on heated oxygen. The world started coming back into focus, but wrong. Could see too much now. The way Jordan's shadow fell in directions that didn't match the lights. The patterns in the ceiling tiles that connected to patterns I'd seen in the ice. The faint vibration in the walls that matched frequencies I'd felt inside the sphere. "Noah." Jordan sat beside the bed, checking my pupils with a pen light. "Can you understand me?" "Yeah." My voice came out rough. "The sphere. There was no sphere." She said it gentle but firm, the way you'd correct a confused child. "You wandered outside the perimeter and nearly froze to death. Hypothermia causes hallucinations, vivid ones. I touched it. It spoke to me." She sighed, set down the penlight. "Noah, I need to tell you something. The water supply here. Director Lewis authorized certain additives, metabolic supplements to help with the isolation and cold. Sometimes they cause side effects, particularly vivid dreams, waking hallucinations in extreme cases. You're drugging us? It's perfectly safe. Just some mild psychotropics to maintain psychological stability. But combined with hypothermia, the effects can be intense," I wanted to argue. To tell her about Yog-Sothoth, about the cosmic knowledge still burning in my skull. But I could see she'd already decided what happened. Easier to believe in drug interactions than dimensional entities. Easier to treat frostbite than fundamental changes to human consciousness. So I stopped talking about it, let her run her tests, chart my vitals, document my recovery. But I knew what I knew. Could feel those alien thoughts taking root, spreading through my consciousness like frost through water. They kept me in medical for 18 hours, long enough for my core temperature to normalize, long enough for them to debride the dead tissue from my hand, long enough for me to notice I wasn't the only one changing. Wade Wong occupied the bed 2 spots down, sedated but not peaceful. He thrashed against the restraints, mumbling in his sleep. Most of it was nonsense, but sometimes words came through clear. "Crystal fire," he said, eyes rolling behind closed lids. "It burns backward through time. The dimensions are fracturing. Can't you see the cracks?" Jordan increased his sedation, but I'd heard enough. He was seeing it too. The wrongness spreading through the station, the way reality had gone thin at the edges. Others came through medical over those 18 hours. Roth with a panic attack that left him hyperventilating about shapes in the ice. Chen with stress-induced insomnia, claiming she could hear mathematics in the walls. Even Marcus stopped by for sleeping pills, though he wouldn't say why. "It's the isolation," Jordan kept saying. "The darkness, the cold, happens every winter." But this wasn't normal winter madness. This was something else. Something that had started when I touched that sphere. Or maybe before. Something Yog-Sothoth had set in motion by choosing me as its conduit. I could feel it now. The entity's influence spreading through my thoughts like ink through water. Not controlling me, exactly. Just present, waiting. Watching through eyes that were mine but also not mine. When they finally released me back to my quarters, I found my notebooks where I'd left them. Picked up my pencil to record what had happened. But when I looked at what I'd written, the words were wrong. The language was wrong. Symbols that hurt to perceive. Equations that solved for impossibilities. I'd changed. The station had changed. And somewhere in dimensions just beyond our perception, Yog-Sothoth waited for the stars to align just a little more. The klaxons hit at 6:43 in the morning. Not the fire alarm or the containment breach warning. This was something else. A sound I'd never heard in all my weeks at Station 12. 3 long blasts followed by a warbling shriek that made my teeth hurt. I rolled out of bed already half-dressed. Sleeping in thermals had become habit after that night with the sphere, and stumbled to my window. The ice outside looked normal. Same endless white under the pre-dawn darkness. But something was wrong with the aurora. The ribbons of green light weren't flowing like they should. They hung frozen in the sky, locked in place like someone had hit pause on reality. Then I saw Chen firing his rifle. He stood maybe 50 meters from the thermal fence, shooting at nothing, just emptying clip after clip into the empty ice field, his breath coming out in desperate clouds. Other figures emerged from the station, maintenance crew, researchers, everyone who could find a weapon, all firing at the same patch of empty air. That's when the light started. It didn't come from anywhere specific. 1 second the ice was dark, the next these columns of crystalline radiance were pouring down from the frozen aurora. Not light like you'd understand it. This stuff had weight, substance. It flowed like honey made of broken glass, and where it touched the ice, reality just gave up. I watched Peterson from maintenance step backward into one of those columns. He crystallized instantly. Not frozen, crystallized. His body turned transparent, every cell converting to some kind of living mineral, and for half a second I could see through him to the ice beyond. See his heart still trying to beat, his lungs attempting one last breath. Then he shattered, just burst apart into a million prismatic fragments that caught the light and threw rainbows across the snow. The tendrils came next. They emerged from the radiance like fingers reaching through water, transparent, almost invisible except for how they bent the air around them. And they hunted. That's the only word for it. They moved with purpose, intelligence, weaving between the rifle fire that couldn't touch them, seeking out the running figures. I grabbed my coat and ran for the corridor. The emergency lighting had kicked in, painting everything in hellish red. People shoved past me, some heading for the exits, others running deeper into the station. Wade Wong pressed himself against a wall, drawing triangles on the metal with his fingernails worn down to bloody nubs. "It's here," he kept saying. "The observer becomes the observed." A tendril phased through the wall behind him. I tried to warn him, but it moved faster than sound. Wrapped around his torso and pulled him backward through solid metal like the wall was just a suggestion. I heard him scream once, then nothing. The main corridor was chaos. Director Lewis stood near the communications room, shouting orders nobody was following. Marcus had given up on organization and was simply yelling for everyone to get to the vehicles. The crystalline light poured through the ceiling panels, pooling on the floor in impossible puddles that reflected dimensions that shouldn't exist. That's when I saw Jordan. She stood in the medical bay doorway, trying to help Roth, who'd collapsed in panic. One of those columns of light descended through the ceiling right above her. Time seemed to slow as the radiance touched her shoulder. "Noah," she said, and her voice came out fractured, like speaking through a prism. The cosmic brilliance consumed her from the inside out. Her body folded inward, not crushed, but folded along angles that human geometry couldn't contain. I saw her skeleton light up through her skin, saw her nervous system flare like a constellation, saw her consciousness scatter across 17 different dimensions before her physical form simply couldn't hold the contradiction anymore. She shattered. The fragments hung in the air for a heartbeat, each one reflecting a different version of her final moment, then fell like rain. "Evacuation Protocol 7. Director Lewis's voice cut through the screaming. "All personnel to the motor pool. Leave everything." The station shuddered, not from impact, from existence itself becoming negotiable. I looked back down the corridor and saw the walls beginning to warp, reality bending like hot plastic. The triangular patterns we'd studied for so long were glowing now, pulsing in rhythm with something vast and alien pressing against our dimension. I ran. We all ran. The motor pool was on the station's west side. I burst through the doors to find snowcats already warming up, exhaust filling the space. Amy Taylor sat behind the wheel of the nearest one, her hands shaking as she worked the controls. "Get in!" she screamed. I didn't need to be told twice. Dove into the passenger seat as she gunned it, tires screaming against the concrete before catching and launching us out into the Arctic night. Behind us, Station 12 was dying. The expanding waves of crystalline light weren't just consuming the building. They were unmaking it. I watched sections of wall simply cease, not destroyed but edited out of existence. The triangular architecture that had seemed so solid, so permanent, folded in on itself like origami in reverse. Amy drove like hell itself was chasing us, which, thinking about it now, might not have been far from the truth. The Snowcat's headlights carved a tunnel through the darkness, the engine screaming as she pushed it past any safe limit. "Don't look back," she said, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. But I did. Had to. Station 12 wasn't there anymore, where the massive triangular structure had squatted on the ice for decades, where dozens of people had just been fighting for their lives. There was nothing. Smooth ice, pristine and untouched, like we'd all been some kind of collective hallucination. The cosmic brilliance hung in the air for another heartbeat, then contracted to a single point and winked out. We drove in silence after that. Amy's breathing gradually slowed from hyperventilation to something more like normal. The fuel gauge dropped steadily, 3/4, half, 1/4. The heater struggled against the Antarctic cold seeping through the cabin. When the engine finally coughed and died, we coasted to a stop in the middle of nothing. Ice in every direction, stars overhead, and the aurora flowing normally again like nothing had happened. Amy found the emergency kit under her seat. Beacons, flares, enough food for maybe 3 days if we rationed. We sat there in the dead snowcat, two people who'd survived something impossible, waiting for a rescue that we both knew wasn't coming. The snowcat's heater had been dead for 3 hours when Amy started talking about the angles. We'd wrapped ourselves in every emergency blanket from the kit, pressed together in the driver's seat for what little warmth two bodies could generate. Her shivering had stopped maybe 20 minutes before. Bad sign, I knew. When you stop shivering, that's your body giving up on trying to stay warm. "Noah." Her voice came out strange, like she was speaking through water. "The corners. They're not right." I followed her gaze to where the windshield met the dashboard. Standard 90-degree angle, nothing special about it. But Amy's pupils had gone wide, tracking something I couldn't see. "Just the cold playing tricks," I said, though we both knew better. After what we'd seen at the station, after Jordan folding into 17 dimensions and Peterson crystallizing into living glass, tricks didn't exist anymore, just things we hadn't learned to see yet. Her hand found mine under the blankets, ice cold, fingers stiff as frozen sausages. The frostbite had taken her fingertips first. I'd watched them go from red to white to that awful waxy gray over the last hour. Now dark patches spread up toward her knuckles. "No." She pulled her hand away, pointed at the corner again with those damaged fingers. "Look, really look." So I did, and for just a second, I saw it too. The angle wasn't 90 degrees anymore. It bent inward and outward at the same time, folding through dimensions that shouldn't exist in a snowcat's interior. Then I blinked and it snapped back to normal. "Jesus," I whispered. Amy laughed, bitter sound, more like a cough. "It's spreading, whatever that thing was, whatever came through when the station..." She trailed off, breath coming in short gasps. The emergency beacon blinked its useless red light on the dash. We'd activated it hours ago, but we both knew the truth. No helicopters were coming, no rescue teams. Communications had been down for weeks before everything went to hell. The outside world probably didn't even know Station 12 existed, much less that it had been erased from reality by cosmic light. Amy's breathing got rougher. I could hear fluid in her lungs. The cold does that, breaks down the barriers, lets everything flood where it shouldn't. Her skin had gone past pale to that bluish tinge that meant her circulation was shutting down. "Listen," she said, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. "If you make it, if somehow you get out of here, we're both getting out." "Shut up." The words came out harsh, desperate. "Just shut up and listen. People need to know about the station, about what Lewis was really doing out here." I stayed quiet, let her talk. The patterns, the symbols, they weren't studying them. Her eyes focused on something past the windshield, past the endless white. They were feeding them. Every observation, every measurement we took, we were keeping it locked up. And now it's free. She was right. I'd felt it the moment I'd touched that sphere when Yog-Sothoth had poured impossible knowledge into my brain. Station 12 hadn't been a research facility. It had been a cage, and we'd been the bars. "Promise me," Amy said. "Promise you'll tell someone, anyone who'll listen, about the crystals, about what's coming." "Amy, promise." "I promise." She relaxed then, sinking back into the seat. For a few minutes we sat in silence, just the wind outside shaking the dead snowcat. Then she spoke again, voice barely a whisper. "I can see them now, the crystals. They're beautiful." Her eyes reflected something that wasn't there, some light source that didn't exist in our reality. Growing up from the ice like flowers, like frozen flowers made of light. I looked out the window. Nothing but darkness and snow. "They're spreading," she continued, "out from where the station was. Getting bigger. She coughed, specks of blood hitting the inside of the windshield. "Getting closer." Her hand found mine again. Colder now, if that was possible. "Reality's broken, Noah. We broke it. That thing, it's not just free. It's changing everything. The angles, the light, the way space fits together. It's all coming apart." I wanted to tell her she was hallucinating. That hypothermia makes you see things, think things that aren't real. But I'd touched the sphere. I'd felt Yog-Sothoth's presence scatter me across dimensions. I knew she was right. Amy's breathing slowed, longer gaps between each breath. Her eyes stayed open, still seeing those crystalline formations that existed somewhere between real and not real. "Beautiful," she whispered. "So beautiful it hurts to look at." Those were her last words. I held her hand as she went, felt her pulse flutter and stop, watched her eyes go flat and empty, still turned toward visions I couldn't see. The blood on the windshield had frozen into tiny red crystals. I sat there for, I don't know how long. Time gets weird when you're alone with the dead in a metal box in the middle of nowhere. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. The cold had numbed everything below my waist, and my thoughts kept scattering like they had when I'd touched the sphere. That's when I saw the light. Just a flicker at first, on the horizon where Station 12 used to be. Then another. Crystalline flashes, like someone signaling with a mirror made of pure mathematics. But there was no one out there. Nothing but smooth ice where our prison had stood. The flashes got brighter, closer. I pressed my face against the side window, breath fogging the glass, wiped it clear with a frozen sleeve and looked again. The lights weren't random. They moved with purpose, spreading outward in expanding circles like ripples in a pond, like something massive had dropped into reality and the waves were still spreading. Each flash left after images that hurt to process, geometric shapes that folded through too many dimensions, colors that shouldn't exist. And behind it all, I felt that presence. Yog-Sothoth, free after 10,000 years, stretching across our reality like oil across water. It was coming for me. Not hunting exactly. More like following. I'd touched it, let it pour knowledge into my head. I was marked, connected, part of the pattern now. The lights grew closer, maybe a mile out, maybe less. Hard to judge distance when space itself was becoming unreliable. I could feel the wrongness approaching, that same sensation from inside the sphere, reality bending, dimensions pressing together where they shouldn't touch. I thought about running, leaving the snowcat, Amy's body, trying to outpace whatever was spreading across the ice. But where would I go? We were 300 miles from the nearest outpost, and even if I could walk that far, what then? This wasn't something you could escape by putting distance between you and it. The station was gone. Jordan was dead. Marcus, Chen, Wade, Peterson, all of them erased or transformed into something else. Director Lewis had tried to maintain the prison, keep the thing locked away with our observations and measurements. We'd been the guards without knowing it, and now the prisoner was free. And I'd been the one who'd touched it, who'd made contact. Another flash, bright enough to throw shadows inside the snowcat. The crystalline light was maybe half a mile out now, moving steady as a tide. Amy had been right. Reality itself was fracturing, spreading out from that point of liberation, remaking everything it touched. Eventually it would reach the coast, then the cities, then everywhere. All because I'd heard a sound in the night and couldn't leave well enough alone. I looked at Amy's frozen face, eyes still open and staring at nothing. At least she wouldn't see what came next, wouldn't watch the world reshape itself into something alien and impossible. The light flashed again, closer now. Close enough that I could see shapes moving within it, geometries that shouldn't exist, angles that folded back on themselves, crystals growing from nothing and dissolving back into light. I was the only one left who knew what had happened, the sole witness to humanity's biggest mistake. And soon, I'd be gone too, transformed or erased or pulled into whatever dimension Yog-Sothoth called home. I sat back in the seat, Amy's corpse cold beside me, and waited for the light to arrive. The sole survivor who'd doomed the world.